So I'm sanctioned by the Chinese Communist Party. That's clearly sending a message to me. But what they're really doing is they're telling the folks who come behind me, if you behave like that guy, we will come after you. Far and away, the greatest threat to the United States from outside of our country is the Chinese Communist Party under the leadership of Xi Jinping. Very capable military. This is the thing that I think for 40 years that leaders didn't get. They want us to live differently here in America. This is not about how they run the show inside their own country. They want America to live more like them.
I think Secretary Pompeo was one of the leading voices of calling out this existential threat that is the Chinese Communist Party. It is the conflict of the century, and it's not going to be won in any 1 year or 2 or 3. It requires persistent acknowledgement.
The threat to this country, to our way of life, to our liberty, to the things that we hold dear, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, those come from Beijing. They come from the Communist Party of China, which is led by its now dictator for life.
And when you're out doing your thing back home, fifth grade Sunday school teacher, right, just teaching a bunch of kids, it does seem far away. The Chinese Communist Party is inside the gates. They're here today. This isn't some far-off proposition. They're working in our schools, in our university systems. We just saw that they gave $50 million to the think tank that then Vice President Biden was running. They didn't give $50 million to the Penn-Biden think tank because they liked Penn or because they wanted American students at Penn to have a better life. They gave $50 million to that institution to influence it, to change the way it thought about the world. And they're doing it all across our country today.
The Chinese Communist Party has a very systematic way of trying to identify critical intellectual property that will help their industries in China compete.
This isn't just a dictator or a party that's imposing a dictatorship in their own land. This is one that has expansive global ambition to replace our very way of life. Mike and I were in lockstep alignment, and not everyone agreed with us. I mean, there are a lot of Wall Street folks, and there are folks in the entertainment industry and the gaming industry that want to turn a blind eye to what China's doing.
We've not had someone like Xi for an awfully long time. And so my meetings with him were not very pleasant because I was pretty direct. He was equally direct back to me. And it was clear. We understood that these two nations weren't partners, weren't competitors, but were in fact, because of Xi, not because of America, but because of him, these two nations were going to be adversaries until such time as China ceased threatening the fundamental rights of every single U.S. citizen.
We have to stand up for the Chinese Communist Party because our way of life, our First Amendment, our very liberties, our freedom of religion are at stake here. And it's so important for us and for our allies. It's not just America. It's Japan, it's Taiwan, it's the Philippines, it's our friends in ASEAN, it's India. All of them are under threat from China. And these are all democracies, and we need to stick together as democracies, stand up for freedom and liberty, and stand up to the CCP.
An important part of how we thought about the relationship was just to demand reciprocity. Tell us how you're going to treat our folks. We'll treat yours the same way. So whether that is an American company trying to do business in China should be treated the same way that a Chinese company trying to do business in the United States would be treated. Our diplomats in China can't leave the compound, can't leave there without getting permission. Today, a Chinese diplomat roams freely across America.
And we imposed those same requirements on Chinese diplomats in Washington. And there was a hue and cry, and people said, you can't do this, and this is unfair to the poor Chinese diplomats. And we called the Chinese diplomats in and said, here are the restrictions on American diplomats in China. Here are the restrictions on you. We want to make sure it's reciprocal. So if you want to give us more freedom in China, we'll give you more freedom here. They didn't.
Fox News alert 80 million Americans now under stay-at-home orders.
New York City currently has more cases than Italy, a third of all the cases.
The deadly Chinese coronavirus plague continues to spread across this country at this hour.
We should never forget that the Chinese Communist Party knew that they had a relatively lethal, highly contagious virus, and they put tens of thousands of people on airplanes and traveled all across the world, spreading that virus to the entire world. That was dangerous. It resulted in the deaths of millions of people. The virus almost certainly escaped from the laboratory there in Wuhan, and the Chinese Communist Party is responsible for all that has followed from that.
I think one of the things that Secretary Pompeo did is call out the tremendous impact that COVID that originated in Wuhan and the fact that they never allowed our inspectors to come in and look at that and kept that information away from the world, which created so much damage.
One thing I do want to say about Mike at the outset of this crisis, when we warned the president on January 28th, I said to the president, this will be the biggest national security crisis he faces as president.
This was, I think, February of 20, at the very front end of the Wuhan virus being unleashed here in America. I was on the call, and the president was speaking with Xi, and Xi was very unhappy with me. I was speaking just as I've done here, talking about the threat from the Chinese Communist Party, and he wanted to use that opportunity to remind the president that he had leverage too. And at that point in time, we were trying to get protective gear and other things out of China to protect America. And so, yes, when the phone call ended, the president reminded me, he said, well, that guy doesn't like you, which I knew already. I went quiet for a little while because we needed to make sure we did everything right here in the United States and got that work done. So this was as close as I came to getting fired, or maybe potentially fired.